Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we'll be going into Week 16 of the NFL schedule, followed by my power rankings. So, without further ado, let's get into it. On Thursday Night Football, we have a matchup between the Broncos and the Chargers, and as all divisional matchups, this is looking to be a pretty close one. The Broncos, they're coming off a win over the Colts in a game where they did not look good in 3 quarters of that game. But by the end, they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter to come back and win that game against the Colts, who had the lead most of that game and just threw it away with that Jonathan Taylor fumble in the end zone as he had a huge rush and dropped the ball right before running into the end zone, which changed the tide of that game. The Chargers, on the other hand, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Buccaneers, 40-17, in a game where they let up more points than they've let up to any team all year. They had not previously let up more than a point value in the 30s, and now they let up 40 points. So definitely not a good defensive performance by them. Their offense looked okay, but they still don't have a rushing attack without J.K. Dobbins, which is definitely detrimental to the team, and they need to figure out something on how to rush. That being said, the Broncos also don't have much of a rushing attack. So this game could be a pretty big defensive game, as both teams generally just have a passing attack and not much else to offer on offense. Bo Nix, he's coming off a game where he threw 3 picks, did not look very good, but they still won that game. And I think this will be a close one, as most divisional games are. But I'm going to go with the Chargers to get a win here, as I do think their experienced quarterback in Justin Herbert is less likely to turn the ball over than Bo Nix is, and I think that both defenses are very capable of getting takeaways and taking advantage of mistakes the other team makes, and so I think while both defenses are very similar, I think the quarterback difference might make the difference in this game just from experience, as I do think Bo Nix is a good quarterback. He's just inconsistent as he's a rookie, so I'm going with the Chargers to win. Moving on Saturday football. Yes, Saturday football is finally here. We've got a matchup between the Texans and the Chiefs. The Texans, they're coming off a win over the Dolphins in a game where they won 20-12. Their offense looked all right. Nico Collins did have 2 touchdowns, but didn't really do much else. They didn't really pass for a ton of yards. The run game looked pretty good, as Joe Mixon does continue to look pretty impressive. But that was about it for their offense. But their defense held the Dolphins to 12 points, had 4 turnovers, 3 of which were interceptions. They played a really good game on defense. The Chiefs, on the other hand, they're also coming off a win over the Browns. It's 21-7 in a game where they picked off Jameis Winston 3 times. Their defense looked pretty good. The Browns didn't score until the fourth quarter, and then they put in Dorian Thompson-Robinson because Jameis Winston was playing so poorly. And the whole time, the Chiefs' defense was playing really well, but their offense really has still yet to find a stride this season. They've still yet to score over 30 points, which the only other 3 teams in the league who haven't scored 30 points all have records of 3 wins or less. Also, Patrick Mahomes might not play in this game, as he got hurt in that last game against the Browns in the fourth quarter. He twisted his ankle. He has a high ankle sprain, and is now considered week to week. So he might not play in this game, especially considering they have another game 4 days later. That all being said, I think this will be a pretty tight matchup, as most Chiefs games are, but I'm going to go with the Texans to win here, especially if Patrick Mahomes doesn't play, as I think the Texans have more potential on offense, and while both defenses are really good, and the Chiefs arguably is better, I do think the Texans is more prone to taking advantage of opportunities. So I'm going to go with the Texans to get this win, especially if they're going against Carson Wentz and leading that Chiefs offense. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this one between the Steelers and the Ravens. The Steelers, they're coming off a loss to the Eagles, 13-27. They couldn't really do anything on offense for most of that game. Their defense looked all right, but Saquon didn't really play, and they still let up 27 points, as Saquon got hurt at one point in that game and did come back in, but it was definitely a disappointing defensive performance. TJ Watt also did get hurt in that game, as he has an ankle sprain. The Ravens, on the other hand, they're coming off a win as well. They beat the Giants 35-14 in a game where Lamar Jackson threw for 5 touchdowns and no interceptions. He had a near-perfect passer rating. He had more touchdown passes than he had incompletions. All around, really impressive performance by Lamar and the Ravens offense. And also a pretty good performance by their defense, although it really wasn't going against much, led by Tommy DeVito and Tim Boyle on offense for the Giants. I do think this will be a really close game, as most Steelers-Ravens games are close, and last time the Steelers did end up winning that game. And while I think that the Ravens are a better team on offense, I think their defensive inconsistencies will definitely take a toll on them, and I think the Steelers have had the Ravens' name over the past few years. Even last year, the Steelers beat them twice when the Ravens were the 1 seed in the AFC. So I'm going to go with the Steelers to win in a very close matchup, but I'm going with the Steelers to take down the Ravens once again. Moving on, we've got a matchup on Sunday where the Giants are taking on the Falcons. And this is probably not going to be a great game. The Giants tend to not be in many games. They got destroyed by the Ravens, as I just talked about. Their defense looked terrible. Their offense really couldn't get much going. The Falcons, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Raiders 15-9 on Monday Night Football in a game where Kirk Cousins finally threw another touchdown, which he hadn't done in over 4 weeks. But other than that, there really weren't many positive takeaways, as the Raiders are a bad team, and they still were barely able to beat them in a game, and their offense couldn't really do very much against a bad Raiders defense. I am going to go with the Falcons to pretty easily win this game, as I do think while the Falcons aren't a great team, they are good enough to beat a bad Giants team, so I'm going to go with the Falcons to win. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this time between the Lions and the Bears. The Lions, they're coming off a loss to the Buffalo Bills in a game where they lost 4 more players with season-ending injuries. They lost David Montgomery, they lost a few guys on defense, they're just losing everybody. They have 13 different players on IR from their defense alone, not to mention their offensive injuries, which there are a few. This defense has been ravished by injuries, and it's just taking a toll on the performance of this team, which really does have Super Bowl aspirations, but might be taken down by injuries. The Bears, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss on Monday Night Football to the Vikings, 12-30, in a game where they really didn't look good. They haven't looked good since the firing of Matt Eberflus, which is ironic because everyone wanted him fired for him losing close games. But now, ever since he's been fired, they haven't been in close games. So they need to figure out their game plan, because they've been shut out in the first half 3 weeks in a row, and that's been really poor on offense. But that second half, they've been playing a lot better. They did score 13 points last week in that second half, or 12 points, rather, and they looked all right in that second half. But their defense definitely needs to step it up back to how they were playing earlier in the season, and their offense really needs to figure it out, especially in the first half. And because of all these woes, I think this could be a close game because it is a divisional matchup, but I think the Lions get this win relatively easily. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Cardinals and the Panthers. The Cardinals, they're coming off a win over the Patriots, 30-17, in a game where James Conner ran all over the Patriots. They really didn't have to do that much else because their run game was just so good. He had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on only 16 carries. Really impressive performance by James Conner. The Panthers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Cowboys in a game where they just did not look very good. They lost 30-14 against a bad Cowboys team. Bryce Young threw 2 interceptions. He looked like he did last year, and at the beginning of this year, he looked like he really regressed from those past few games over the past few weeks. But the Panthers, they're not a good team, but they've been improving throughout the season. The Cardinals, they're not a great team, but they've been getting worse throughout the season, although this past week was a nice bounce back. So I do think this might be a close matchup, but I'm going to go with the Cardinals to win this game, as I think it means more to them to keep their playoff hopes alive, and I think they'll fight harder for that win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Rams and the Jets. The Rams, they're coming off a win over the 49ers, 12-6 on Thursday Night Football, in a game where neither team scored a touchdown. It was 4 field goals to 2 field goals, and the Rams' defense looked great, but their offense really couldn't get much going besides Puka Nacua and a little bit of Kyren Williams. Cooper Kupp didn't even have a catch in that game, which was a huge disappointment to all fantasy managers who made the playoffs with Cooper Kupp, as he put up a fat 0. The Jets, on the other hand, they're also coming off a win over the Jacksonville Jaguars in a game where they won 32-25 against a backup quarterback. Their defense just does not look good. It's nowhere near the level it was last year when it was one of the best units, if not the best unit in the entire league. Their defense looks terrible this year, but their offense did look a lot better. Aaron Rodgers played a lot better in that game, and they were able to put up a good amount of points. But again, that defense definitely looks like a problem, as they're letting up a ton of points to a backup quarterback on a bad team. Because of all of that, I'm going with the Rams to win this one. I think the Jets are still a pretty bad team, so I think the Rams get this win pretty easily. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this one between the Eagles and the Commanders. The Eagles, they're coming off a win over the Steelers, 27-13, in a game where their offense was working pretty well, even without Saquon Barkley. They were passing really efficiently. Jalen Hurts played really well. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both had over 100 yards. Great game for them on offense, especially for being able to plan around the injury to Saquon Barkley. And getting him back next week should definitely be a huge boost to that offense. The Commanders, on the other hand, they are coming off a win over the Saints, 20-19, in a game where it really did come down to the wire. The Saints went for a 2-point conversion right at the end after scoring a touchdown, and they did not get it. The Commanders played a really good first half and just couldn't do much in the second half. They barely scored in that second half, and they let up a ton of points, especially the second Spencer Rattler replaced Jake Haener for the Saints. Both of these teams, the Eagles and the Commanders, they're both really good. The Eagles are definitely a better team, though, and I think while these two teams play each other really close every time, and the Commanders tend to win or play the Eagles really well, I do think this will, just like those games in the past few years, this game will also be really close, if not closer than the first game they played this year. That being said, I am leaning towards the Eagles to win. I really would not be surprised if the Commanders come away with a win, as I do think the Commanders are a good team. I just think that the Eagles are going to be a bit too much for the Commanders to handle, especially on defense for the Commanders, especially if Saquon Barkley is fully healthy in this game. So I'm going to go with the Eagles to win. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup between the Browns and the Bengals. The Browns, they're coming off a loss 7-21 to the Chiefs in a game where they benched Jameis Winston because he threw 3 interceptions, and they're planning on starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson in this upcoming game against the Bengals. The Bengals, they're coming off a win over the Titans, 37-27, in a game where it was a rough game. There were 10 turnovers combined between the two teams. Joe Burrow threw 2 interceptions and fumbled the ball. There were 26 combined flags. It was a really rough game for both teams. But the Bengals did come away with a win. Their defense looked all right, as they did have a few good takeaways, including a pick six, and what actually should have been 2 pick sixes. But they did Jordan Battle dropped the ball right before entering the end zone to recover his pick six, and it counted as a fumble through the back of the end zone and a touchback. That all being said, the Bengals are a much better team than the Browns. The Browns are starting a second-year quarterback who really doesn't have a lot of hope going for him. So I'm going to go with the Bengals to win. Even though it's a divisional matchup, I see this game being less close than a lot of other divisional matchups, especially with the Browns starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I just don't see a lot of hope for them. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Titans and the Colts, another divisional matchup. The Titans, as I just said, they're coming off a loss 27-37 to the Bengals in a game where Will Levis got benched after throwing 3 interceptions, including a pick six. He looked terrible and actually got benched in front of his ex-girlfriend who was at that game. He looked terrible. They did not look much better under Mason Rudolph, who also threw an interception. And they just while they could get a decent amount going in the run and pass game with Tyjae Spears. He was really the only benefit to that offense in this week. The Colts, they're coming off a loss to the Broncos in a game where they had the lead the entire time and then let up 21 unanswered points in the fourth quarter. They, as I said, had what would have been a touchdown to take the lead 20-7, but Jonathan Taylor dropped the ball right before entering the end zone, which counted as a fumble and a touchback. That was really hurtful to them because they never scored again, and then the Broncos went on a scoring streak and ended up winning that game. This is a divisional matchup, and these teams tend to play each other close, but the Colts are a much better team, and while they're basically eliminated from the playoffs with that loss, they haven't technically been eliminated, so they're playing for a lot more than the Titans are, so I'm going to go with the Colts to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup during the 3 o'clock window between the Vikings and the Seahawks. The Vikings, they're coming off a win over the Bears 30-12 on Monday Night Football in a game where their defense looked great, their offense looked pretty good. Justin Jefferson dropped a wide-open pass that would have been a touchdown and followed it up by having Sam Darnold throw an interception. And had that turn of events not taken place, they might have even won by more points. They looked great on both sides of the ball. The Seahawks, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Packers on Sunday Night Football, 30-13, in a game where they just couldn't get anything going on offense. Their defense couldn't stop anything, and Geno Smith got injured towards the end of that game, and Sam Howell came in and looked even worse than Geno Smith had been playing. That all being said, I do think the Seahawks will have somewhat of a bounce-back game, although if Sam Howell is playing against this Vikings defense, I really don't see a lot of hope for them, as this Vikings defense is unbelievable. And I think regardless of who's playing at quarterback for the Seahawks, the Vikings will still likely win. However, I think they stand a better chance of making it a close game if Geno Smith plays, but I'm going with the Vikings regardless. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this time between the Patriots and the Bills. The Patriots, they're coming off a loss to the Arizona Cardinals in a game where their defense looked awful. Their run defense especially. They were just letting up nearly 10 yards a carry to James Conner. He looked unbelievable on the ground. Their whole run game looked amazing against the Patriots. And their defense is a huge problem. Their offense looked all right, though, which is definitely a step up from where they had been pre-Drake May. The Bills, on the other hand, they're coming off a very impressive win over the Lions, 48-42, in a game where 2 weeks in a row, their defense let up over 40 points, and they've now let up 86 points in 2 weeks combined. However, their offense has allowed them to win one of those games and be really close in the other one. So I do think their offense will keep them in games despite how bad their defense has been playing, and I think the Bills will come away with a win in what might be one of the less close divisional matchups. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Jaguars and the Raiders. The Raiders, they're coming off a loss on Monday Night Football to the Falcons in a game where their defense looked a lot better than it had been. But they were playing a Falcons team that's been struggling a lot as of late, and their offense only scored 9 points and has really struggled throughout the entire season. Even Brock Bowers struggled in that game, and he's been the one bright spot to that offense most of the year, and he really couldn't get much going against the Falcons either. Jaguars, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Jets, 32-25, in a game where Mac Jones really kept them in that the whole time. Their defense looked terrible, but their offense actually was performing, as Mac Jones was able to lead them to a few touchdowns, and they were able to stay in that game. I do think the Jaguars are a better team than the Raiders, even with a backup quarterback. Granted, the Raiders do have a backup quarterback also. So I'm going to go with the Jaguars to win in what I do think will be a close game between two bad teams that very few people will watch, but I'm still going to go with the Jaguars to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the 49ers and the Dolphins. The 49ers, they're coming off a 6-12 loss to the Rams in a game that basically lost them their playoff hopes. They, unfortunately, did lose that game without a single touchdown on either side. It was a very boring watch, and they really just couldn't get anything going on offense. Their defense looked fantastic, though, in that first half, especially with Dre Greenlaw coming back. They really just didn't allow almost any points. And then the second half, they looked a little worse, especially with Dre Greenlaw exiting the game due to injury and Javondre Campbell refusing to enter the game to back him up. So the 49ers definitely suffering from some of those losses on defense. The Dolphins, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss in a game that was also for their playoff hopes against the Texans, 20-12. They basically are out of the playoffs as well now. And while their offense really couldn't perform last week, it's been really inconsistent all season. Jalen Waddle suffered an injury, and Tyreek Hill really had to step up. And he really hasn't been playing that well this year. So I'm really uncertain about both of these teams. I really don't know what direction this game could go. It could be really close, or it could be a blowout in either direction, as both of these teams have a ton of potential week in and week out, but neither of these teams have been living up to that potential most of these weeks. That being said, I am going to lean towards the 49ers winning this game, as I think they're slightly better of a team and more consistent, and have been playing at a better level, especially at the wide receiver position, as Juwan Jennings has been playing a lot better somehow than Tyreek Hill has this year. And if Jalen Waddle isn't able to play in this game, that's a huge loss to the Dolphins' offense. That being said, though, the Dolphins' run game is probably a lot better than the 49ers, but the 49ers' defense is a lot better than the Dolphins. So I am going to go with the 49ers in what I think will be a game that could go in any direction, but I'm going with the 49ers to win. Moving on Sunday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Buccaneers and the Cowboys. The Cowboys, they're coming off a win over the Panthers, 30-14, in a game where their defense looked pretty good. Their offense also looked pretty good. They had multiple interceptions. Their offense was scoring points. Cooper Rush actually looked pretty good at quarterback. CeeDee Lamb had a great game, and they were able to win that game against a team that they were projected to lose to in the Panthers. The Buccaneers, on the other hand, they're coming off a very impressive win over the Chargers in a game where they scored 40 points against that Chargers defense, which was the defense leading the league in scoring, as they had let up the least amount of points and then let up 40 points to the Buccaneers. That offense is playing unbelievable. Their run game had over 200 yards. Their pass game had over 200 yards. Baker Mayfield had 4 touchdowns. Just a great game all around by them. And I think the Buccaneers are a really good team. They're getting hot at the right time. They're going on a run. Mike Evans only needs less than 300 yards over these last 3 games for his 11th straight 1,000-yard season, and that's even with missing multiple games due to injury this year. And I think with Mike Evans playing at the level he's been playing, and Baker Mayfield and that run game between Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, I do think the Buccaneers win this game, and I don't think it'll be too hard of a win for them. And finally, on Monday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Saints and the Packers. The Saints, they're coming off a 19-20 loss to the Commanders in a game where they looked all right, but they really did need to come back with Spencer Rattler towards the end of the game to really be in it, and they didn't get the 2-point conversion to win them the game. Alvin Kamara had a really awesome touchdown grab, though, and played unbelievable in that game. The Packers, on the other hand, they are coming off a major win over the Seahawks in a game where their offense looked fantastic, their defense looked fantastic, they really weren't letting up a ton of points, they were scoring on most possessions, and they're just a really well-rounded team. I do think the Packers should win this game pretty decisively, as the Saints are not a good football team, and the Packers are, so I'm going to go with the Packers to win. Looking at my top 10 power rankings, coming in at number 10, I've got the Rams. They're really on the rise. They're playing a lot better. Their offense is playing really well. Their defense played really well last week, but played really poorly the week before, so it's inconsistent. But their offense is really carrying the team. Their coaching is amazing, and they're winning games again. So they're coming in at number 10. At 9, I've got the Steelers. They did just lose to the Eagles, but the Eagles are a fantastic team and are going to beat most teams in the league. The Steelers are still 10-4. They're leading their division. They have the 3rd seed in the AFC. They're playing really good football. So I'm going to pick them for number 9. Their defense is playing really well. Their offense has been playing really well other than last week. So for that reason, they're in at 9. At 8, I've got the Packers. Their offense and defense make for a really well-rounded team. Their run game is great with Josh Jacobs. Their pass game is great with their variety of wide receivers. And Jordan Love is playing really well lately. So for that reason, they're in at number 8. At number 7, I've got the Buccaneers. They've been playing really good football. They're on a win streak. They're the only team to put up 40 or more on the Chargers, who have one of the best defenses in the league. Their offense has just been unbelievable. Their run game and pass game are both unstoppable. And while their defense doesn't look incredible, it's good enough for what their offense is. At number 6, I've got the Lions. Yes, they've fallen quite a bit. That's because of injuries, though, not because of one loss. Their injuries are just really taking this defense down, as their defense is not performing nearly to the level it was earlier in the year. Their offense is also going to suffer from the loss of David Montgomery. But this is still a really good team. They're just suffering through a lot of injuries. But if they can get some of these pieces back, such as Aiden Hutchinson said he can return if they make it to the championship game or the Super Bowl, then I do think if these guys can come back from injury, this team could still be back to the best team in the league. And number 5, I've got the Ravens. They've been playing really well lately. Yes, they lost to the Eagles a few weeks ago. But again, the Eagles are a really good team. And the Ravens have been playing unbelievable on offense. Lamar Jackson is having an MVP run. And yes, Josh Allen is probably going to beat him out for it, but he's been in the conversation the entire year. He's not turning the ball over. Their offense just looks unstoppable with the combination of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And their defense has been really improving over these past few weeks. They've taken a big step up. Definitely not nearly as good as they were last year, but definitely taking a few steps back in the right direction. Number 4, I've got the Chiefs. They've been playing not great, but this was their first not one-score win in a very long time. And while Patrick Mahomes did get hurt, he's week to week and should be back within a few weeks. They are going to now take on a few really good teams in the AFC, such as the Texans and the Steelers, and so we'll see how they match up against those teams. But for now, I have the Chiefs in at number 4 because they're winning games, they're finding ways to win games. They didn't win a one-score game, and they're just playing a lot better. And number 3, I've got the Vikings. They've been really improving their offense and defense. Their defense is probably the best in the entire league. Their offense has really improved under Sam Darnold, and who's been playing a lot better lately. Their combination of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Aaron Jones is really working for that offense, especially with TJ Hawkinson in at tight end. And they're just winning games. They're barely behind the Lions and the Eagles, as they all three have the same record in the NFC and are fighting for the 1 seed. In at number 2, I've got the Bills. Their defense definitely is a problem, as they've let up 86 points over the past 2 weeks, but their offense looks actually unstoppable. Josh Allen is playing the best football of his entire career. He's barely turning the ball over, and they're winning games for the most part. They are the 2 seed in the AFC. They're playing unbelievable. They are not turning the ball over, and the run game is looking much improved from where it was earlier in the season. So for that reason, they're in at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I've got the Eagles. They've been playing the best on offense. They've been playing nearly the best on defense, as their defense is unbelievable and a top unit in the league. Their secondary just looks so much improved from where it was last year. Their offense can really diversify, as they've got Saquon Barkley, the league's leading rusher. But even in a game where he's injured, they still found ways to win, as they used their passing game and had 2 receivers over 100 yards and a great game from Jalen Hurts. So they just can't be stopped unless you take out multiple pieces of that offense or multiple pieces of that defense, which as of this point doesn't seem to be the case. So for that reason, the Eagles are in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening this week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my socials on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to come tune in next time. I'll see you guys then. Peace.